Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Centrick Talks Property. Today we've got our guest speaker, Chris Wiley, our Tenancy Services Director, so pretty much a walking encyclopedia of all things property management and landlord legislation, so very, very lucky to have him today. So thank you and welcome, Chris.
Thanks for having me.
Giving up your time. I know it's a busy day, busy week.
But it's Friday.
It's Friday, so we're all happy, yeah, absolutely. So we're going to talk a little bit about, I suppose, legislation around lettings. So from one angle, a landlord's perspective, and then from another one, a tenant's perspective as well. So maybe if we start with the landlord world at the moment.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's been a bit of a crazy 12 months, as most people have found it.
Yeah, definitely.
What's been, I suppose, what have been the big changes in the last 12 months from if you're a landlord or thinking of being a landlord that you should really be aware of?
I think the first thing to remember is landlords were only just getting over the tenant fee ban when all of this happened. So that had a huge impact on clients of all sizes, and whether you've got one property or 100. It was a big impact on them in terms of income. And then once that kind of settled down,
another one.
COVID hit, and here you go. Here's the next challenge. So I mean, market drivers aside, obviously the market itself fluctuated a lot last year, with lockdowns and demand, and NHS needing to move, and the various factors.
Knowing if we could even rent properties
Absolutely.
and move people into.
I mean, in the first lockdown, we were playing it by ear a little bit, weren't we?
Yes.
And,
I recall those days.
long days. But I think that the main impact has been the effect that job losses and the furlough scheme have had on people's ability to pay rent.
Yes.
Landlords have obviously taken a huge hit in the last 12 months. One of our third-party companies that help us with rent and legal estimated that there'd be in excess of £8 million worth of rent arrears.
Wow.
By the end of last year. We haven't had the final figures through yet, but it certainly would have been
up there. It's a lot of unpaid rent.
It is, absolutely. And in a lot of those cases, not necessarily avoidable. A lot of industries were hit very, very hard, hospitality in particular. People were losing jobs, people were losing hours. The furlough scheme was obviously a massive help that helped a lot of businesses stay afloat. But at one point, I think it was 60%. I think they were paying.
Wow.
And companies had to top that up. And that obviously had an impact on people's ability to pay rent.
Meet the monthly outgoings.
Coupled with that, obviously the government didn't want to see people out on the street. So from very, very early on in the first lockdown, they did promise not to evict unnecessarily. And effectively, in the first lockdown, courts were shut down. And the reopening of them, there were several delays. It was originally meant to come back in August. That got pushed through to September. They opened up in some capacity, but then obviously we went into another lockdown in November. Tier 4 came in, and then again now as of recording this, we're in another lockdown. So I mean, we've got cases that people went into rent arrears or serious rent arrears as early as the start of last year, and we still haven't seen the inside of a court.
Of course.
Which obviously has a huge.
So, what would your advice be to landlords then? Obviously, if their tenants are starting to struggle to pay the rent for obvious reasons, what would your advice be to those landlords at the moment?
The advice for landlords, and it will be similar with tenants, is to communicate and to be open. One thing that the government has made very, very clear is that if a case does see the inside of a courtroom, the first thing that will be looked at is, did the landlord and their agent, along with the tenant, try and get a deal together so that if a tenant was in a position to pay a certain amount of rent, whether it be reduced or not, some kind of payment plan was put in place. That would be the first thing they look for. And so landlords,
deal making.
Absolutely. Landlords have got to be amenable to that. We have had some incredibly generous landlords that have said, right, for X amount of time, I'm going to reduce your rent and not expect that payment back.
Yeah.
The majority of landlords, and understandably so, have reduced the rent for a certain amount of time, but it will be a clawing back exercise after that.
Bit of a payment plan
will
option.
Have to pay on top.
Okay. And there are some options out there to landlords from a financial point of view for mortgages, and I don't want to get on the financial route, as we're obviously not advisors, but there are mortgage holidays still around.
Yeah, the mortgage holidays are still around. We haven't had official confirmation of whether that's going to be extended as yet. But considering the fact that we've been put into another lockdown, it's one of those things, a bit like the business rates that they're looking at again now. I expect to hear something in the coming weeks that's going to be extended.
Yeah, absolutely. So advice to landlords then, try and make a deal of some form of payment plan. Absolutely. Ultimately, some payments better than none. Explore your options in terms of financial lending options from your bank, your mortgage lender, to see if there's any lending holidays still available. And I suppose try and get through the I suppose hopefully the last part of this pandemic is as amicably as possible with your tenant.
Absolutely. I mean, the tenants that are paying something, my advice to landlords is something is better than nothing at the moment. It would be, even if the tenant did vacate of their own choice, you're certainly not going to be able to evict them anytime soon. But even if they vacated of their own choice, the market is very difficult at the moment to relet. So some income is better than none, and that would be my primary
And on
advice.
evictions, you mentioned obviously about the courts, the turnaround times, they've been shut, there's a backlog, etc. What they'd look for when it went to court. What is the eviction turnaround time process now at the moment? Do we have an idea on that?
So the latest communication we've had is that courts and evictions will get back up and running in the second week of Feb. They have identified that any bailiff appointments, there will be a minimum 14 days notice. So obviously previously a court could say, right, the bailiff's coming round tomorrow or next couple of days. There's a minimum of 14 days between that decision
to
being
the
made
occupier
and then the bailiff actually turning up at someone's door. But again, what I would stress is there is a backlog, not just obviously in Birmingham, but across the country at the moment. And they are prioritising. So, the first ones will be the excessive rent arrears that may even stretch well beyond kind of COVID starting. There will be people that are in arrears that were in arrears before this even began. And then obviously there are other instances that aren't necessarily arrears related, but possession is needed, that will be prioritised as well. So it's just a case of still bearing with it at the moment.
And I was going to say there are some guidance around evictions based on other, not just rent arrears in terms of domestic abuse or etc.
So the section notices, there have been changes to the section notices that come along with a standard AST. Obviously, previously a landlord could provide 2 months' notice if they wanted possession of their property back. For example, if they were going to sell, that has been extended to 6 months.
6 months now.
It was extended in September, and we don't foresee that going back anytime soon. There are Section 8 possibilities. There are a long list, and I'd advise any landlord to obviously speak to their advisor or agent if they do have a specific circumstance with their tenant. Because as you mentioned, things like domestic abuse, antisocial behaviour, or rent arrears in excess of 6 months, you could still potentially serve a Section 8 for a shorter period of time of potentially 2 weeks. But it's still dependent on the fact of getting a court date. And that's the crux of it.
Okay, brilliant. And then in terms of what landlords can do to protect themselves, obviously rent and legal insurance is very important at the moment, you would say?
Absolutely, I mean, we would advise any landlord to consider that at the moment, even if your tenant has been very good at paying their rent throughout this time. That doesn't necessarily mean that they weren't stretched by doing it. And the options available are getting better. There was a point where, as you can imagine, rent and legal protection was pulled by a lot of insurers.
I was going to say it is available at the moment because it was literally taken off the shelf.
It is available, and the terms of those policies are going back to a much better level. A lot a lot of policies reduce what they would pay out.
Yeah.
But we're seeing that that's going back to a bit more of a normality now.
Brilliant.
So to speak to your policyholder or obviously agent.
Yeah. So try and protect yourself against
Absolutely.
any lost rent.
Without a doubt. Yeah, for that £30 a month, it could save you thousands in the long run, because that not only protects you from the rent, but also the legal fees associated with getting your property back if it comes to it.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. And then I suppose from a tenant's perspective, I suppose very much similar advice, but anything else you can add to that?
Yeah, I mean, communication is key.
Yeah.
It's very easy, and there's certainly no judgment. It's for burying your head in the sand.
Yeah.
Financial topics are very difficult at the best of times.
Yeah.
But communication is key from an agent's point of view and a landlord's point of view. If you're speaking to them, explaining the situation, trying to resolve it in a way that you can, even if it is the fact that at the moment you can't pay anything. Yeah, communication is the first port of call,
and as early as possible, because I think again, once arrears have clocked up for several months, you've lost any goodwill from landlord or tenant.
And it snowballs very, very quickly.
It does,
once month one's out the way, you can be in thousands of pounds without even blinking. And then it's very hard to get back from that. The other thing I would suggest is speak to your local council or government. There are grants available. Right. We have been made aware this week that there is another pot en route. The government have apparently pledged £500 million to support renters that are currently struggling because of the situation. Right. We haven't been given any details of how to access that yet. Right. But I would imagine that it would be through local government.
Watch this space.
But yeah, even up to now, we've been advising tenants to speak to their local council to see if they are eligible for any kind of grant or scheme that might support them. Yeah.
Okay. So good communication.
Absolutely.
Goodwill. Trying to put together a payment plan of some sort. Yeah. Where your agent can hopefully communicate that to the landlord and everyone's on the same page. Yes. Okay, brilliant. Any particular trends you've seen over the last sort of 12 months, given the pandemic, and where do you see the market in 2021 in terms of legislation or anything coming this year that a landlord should be aware of?
I mean, even again before COVID, lettings and the private renting sector was a hot topic for government. I think they were trying to claw back on ignoring the sector for a long period of time. So landlords will have noticed certain legislation coming in recently. EPCs, the minimum standard, that is still a hot topic,
and that's how efficient the property is performing.
Absolutely. So obviously it's still a legal requirement to have one, but they are looking even further into how to improve those standards, and I would expect more changes over the minimum next couple of years to come up,
which is a good thing. I think if you're going to rent a property out to a tenant, it should be in suitable order. So it's just how achievable those jumps are, I suppose.
Without a doubt. Another trend is licensing. Right. So as a lot of our landlords will be aware, HMOs have been a hot topic over the last few years, but we are seeing more and more local councils and local governments implement licensing for landlords.
So just general landlord licensing, not specific to HMOs or anything.
Yeah, absolutely. If you rent a property out, you need to be accredited, you need to have a license, and you have to meet a minimum standard. Right. Nottingham and Liverpool are two prime examples of areas that do this. It is council-led, but I would suspect and I would expect
other councils and cities start to follow suit.
Obviously, the advantage of that is that it does maintain a much better minimum standard of properties for tenants, which is
standard
absolutely
up a little bit, which again,
standard and safety.
We all agree with.
But the flip side is there's always cost involved for landlords as well. And it's something that they're going to have to consider. Even
margins being squeezed again.
Absolutely. And then the other big change is obviously EICRs or electrical certificates. It's been the case for a long, long time that gas safety certificates have to be carried out every 12 months for properties that have gas supply. And we've, as an industry, been pushing for electric to go down the same line. I think Grenfell was a big push factor for it to finally get over the line. But at the moment, any new contract, so that's a new tenancy or a renewal, must have a valid EICR certificate. Okay. As of the 1st of April, any current tenancy, so whether there's been a changeover since last June or not, will also need one.
So every rented property by law must have an electrical certificate currently by the 1st of April.
By the 1st of April.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And there are some rumours that government might be extending this, but
again,
again,
I mean, there are challenges. Obviously, everyone's trying to do the same at the same time. There's problems with access at the moment. A lot of tenants are very hesitant to let people in, as you understand. I must stress that this is a permitted reason to enter a property. It is a safety certificate and needs to be carried out.
Yes.
But equally, every agent, every landlord, every electrician is currently trying to do the same at the moment. And sources suggest that we'd have a lot of non-compliance across the country if that deadline wasn't extended. But as it stands, I have to stress to all of our landlords that it's the 31st of July. It's better to be safe than sorry. Let's just get it
1st of April.
1st of April, sorry. 31st of March.
So we should have a valid EICR electrical certificate by the 1st of April on
every
file.
rented property.
Okay, perfect. Okay then. And in terms of the future around legislation, anything right out there on the periphery of, obviously EICRs is the next one, but
EICRs is the next one. I would expect more changes with the EPCs. Other than that, it's very much landlord licensing. After the pandemic. I'd expect them
Easy to say.
Tongue-tied. I'd expect them to jump back on that quite quickly, and other councils to get on board. So there's nothing imminent on the horizon. There's already been a lot of changes in the last 18 months.
Yeah, of course.
And it's been tricky to get everything over the line, but we'll see.
Okay, brilliant. Well, we usually ask one quick fire question at the end.
Okay.
And that is, given it's the property industry we work in, describe to us your absolute dream home, Chris.
Dream home?
Yes. I know you're actually purchasing one at the moment.
I am. I wouldn't,
I'm sure you're not there yet.
I wouldn't say it's the dream home.
I
would say some kind of cabin, remote, lake, forest, very rural.
So you don't like people?
Peace and quiet. Peace and quiet. Peace and quiet with Wi-Fi.
No tenant legislation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you very much for your time, Chris. I hope everybody's found that really useful. Join us again, guys. Anything you would like to see on our content, please do let us know, and please feel free to like and share. But I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time. Waving at me.